expansion leads to change, and change is hard. So how do you maintain or improve customer satisfaction?
The beauty of the job of a CSM is that you are creating that cohesion across different teams that will affect the perception of your customer. Customer has a view is better, even if behind the scenes
Yeah.
there's a lot of craziness. You want to make sure you're driving expansion as a CSM because that's where you're driving the most value. Important to listen, but also listen with a certain goal in mind.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to my guest today. Good morning, JP. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rijuta. Yourself?
I am doing fabulous, fantastic. Coming off of a nice Thanksgiving holiday here in the US and ready to get right into the swing of things. Our conversation today is about a prescriptive approach, your prescriptive approach to driving expansion. Expansion is something that we all strive for, especially in the SaaS world. And you have a great approach that you practice. And I would like for you to talk to our audience today. Our audience has probably joined from Asia, here on the East Coast, and then intermittently in various other time zones as well, hopefully. So a quick introduction to you, JP. JP von Halle, my guest today, is a customer success consultant for over 20 years now, and you've worked in management, in professional services, in service delivery, also offering support, especially with overseeing delivery and operations for large, big name corporations, big names such as Splunk, big names such as VMware, Carbon Black, and then DocuSign. You also had thought leadership that you share across in various formats, the prescriptive approach being one, but also your blueprint for creating real customer success. So tell us a little bit about that. Take us through some salient points of your journey and what led you to this prescriptive approach.
Yeah, that'd be great. Good to bring up the slides.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So as she said, today I'll be talking about prescriptive process to drive expansion. And prescriptive is one of the key words there. We all want to drive expansion, but I feel like often we kind of amble our way into it. We don't always have a methodology. This will speak to a high-level methodology. As she mentioned, I have 20 plus years experience across different organizations in CSM, professional services, sport, et cetera, both in leadership, operational, hands-on. So pretty broad. That includes Splunk. I led the operations there. We covered about 185 CSMs, $4 billion of ARR. VMware, I led the strategic customer success management team. We were directly accountable for 100 million ARR. So kind of been there, done that. But what I also pride myself on is being able to translate some of those best practices into things that companies of all sizes can use. High level in terms of what I'm going to talk about today are one, you want to make sure you're driving expansion as a CSM because that's where you're driving the most value. Renewals will get you so far as a company or as a CSM, but where people perceive true value from CSMs is where they're helping and part of the group with a sales rep and others to drive expansion. So it's important to get it right. Most people, very general listening skills. It's important to listen, but also listen with a certain goal in mind and think about a structured and proactive approach to drive more expansion, which is what I'll talk about today. So first things to think about are listening for specific triggers. This is, again, moving from a general listening, which is important, to thinking about the triggers that will drive expansion. So you're listening for things like new business goals, when a customer is going to acquire other companies, special events, whether that's an event of a meeting or whether that's the event of buying new hardware, but some triggering event that might cause an expansion. New leadership is another common one that can trigger both a renewal conversation as well as expansion. The second box here is all about the proactive education. So aside from what you hear from the customer in a more reactive form, educating them and driving them down the path as a trusted advisor, letting them know what best practices look like and how they might map their journey to those best practices, identifying value that they can strive for to expand, calling out license utilization. For many of these things, I'll show you a couple of tools afterwards that'll give you a feel for how you might do that. Then also consider the quantitative and qualitative aspects of expansion. So quantitative is really, I want more of the same thing. So the customer may have certain functionality that they realize that they need to put on additional devices or groups or users. Qualitative is about needing something additional and different. So that's commonly an additional capability that they don't have. So when you think about these four quadrants, it really drives you down the path of both the behavior you want to drive. So the reactive listening, the proactive education, and all the while looking for both quantitative expansion as well as qualitative expansion.
Hey, JP, I had a quick comment. So on your previous slide and then leading into this one here, you mentioned that it is led by the sales rep, but it is really a team effort.
Yeah.
Do you often find that when there is a group effort, when it is a team effort, it leads to better results on the quantitative side as well as the qualitative, or is that more driving the qualitative side of things?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. If I think about the major players in the team, the sales rep, it could also be account manager, depending on how your organization is set up. I think of as the quarterback for expansion. So they
Yeah.
should have vision of the big picture of how you'll expand. And they'll also take care of classically the commercial terms. The role of the CSM is to be a player on the team to line up, number one, the sales rep with information that will lead to an expansion. That's the qualitative and quantitative. All the things that you're seeing interacting with the customer day in, day out that the sales rep may not see,
Yeah.
you're lining up for the expansion. And then other players are in there, among others, the technical folks
Right.
are on ensuring that the deployments are going well, and everybody needs to make sure that the customer is satisfied and enjoying the interactions along with getting value.
Absolutely. It really is that triad, isn't it? It's the sales team, like you said, quarterbacking the conversation, the engagement, and then CS and the technical teams, whoever that may be, SEs, support, professional services, whoever is involved in that technical aspect at a given point in time, it's that triad offering the overarching experience.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Rijuta. So then talking a little more specifically about some of the tools to drive expansion, and this isn't meant to be everything that you can think about, but some of the main tools and some interesting tools. First one is something I call a capability map. And this is really about educating the customer proactively and something that you should do early on. So early on, when your product was purchased, it might have been purchased by a vendor management team. And now you're working with a whole new team. And even that vendor management team and the new team probably have a view of one of your functional elements that they're going to deploy. But it's important for expansion and general renewals that they understand while we're deploying one capability currently, we have these other capabilities. And so I think in terms of this capability map, where you structure these different functions and the capability list really should align with your product offerings. So your 5 product offerings, for example, and even better if they can align with some sort of standard framework. So in security, for example, it might be the MITRE or NIST frameworks. In project management, it might be an agile framework. but what are
Yeah.
the capabilities that are commonly found? So step one is all about education, and you should do this early and often. Step two is about then tracking the progress. So in this example, we've identified a couple of functions that we're rolling out. One has been rolled out to production. Another one is being targeted for Q2. And then a couple more. One, there's no offering in your product set to offer that thing. And then another one is available, but they're not using it right now. And then
Yeah.
the third and final phase of it and utilization of it is around mapping the entire ecosystem. So where there were gaps that we saw before, like you don't have a certain functionality, this B1, you don't have functionality in that area for the framework, you may work with one of their partners that they're already there once you realize they're in that ecosystem, or bring them in. Other places you may then see a competitor in that ecosystem that allows you to expand in something that they're actually currently maintaining for the customer that you're capable of maintaining.
And this capability map is just gold. I mean, this literally, you often feel like in CS, oh, what should I be talking about next? I have this conversation coming up. This absolutely lays down the direction of any conversation that you're having. Where is the customer at in their life cycle? What can be discussed today? Should we be having a conversation? Can we invite them to another ad hoc discussion just based on where things are with how they're engaged with the product?
Yeah, that's a great point. I've often heard from CSM saying exactly what you just said. I don't know what to cover anymore because we've rolled out the things they want to roll out. But it was very important from the start, even before that first deployment, that
Yeah,
this is introduced, that the customer has this vision of what could be, both
yeah,
in their cadence meetings as well as in the EBRs that you'll be doing with the executives to bring up the options, what good looks like.
yeah. Awesome.
Okay. Next is license utilization tracking, and this is very important that you align early on the goals and value. So targeting, and I'm showing this right now as transactions, but the value can come in many forms. It can be revenue, cost, environmental, risk, etc. Whatever represents value. In this case, we're saying this many transactions are targeted to be rolled out each month, and we're going to
Mhm.
track against that. But the second part is we've described a value to those transactions. Using as an example, this is something we did at DocuSign, where DocuSign had a certain charge for every envelope that was sent out. Now, if you left it at that, the customer would think of the envelope as being a cost. And
Yeah,
when a customer thinks of something as a cost, they're not going to push to use it. They're actually going to often rear back. And in fact, executives then may eventually do that, cut that out as a cost cutting measure. So what you want to do, which we did at DocuSign, is we flipped that view of cost you X dollars per envelope, but it'll get you 10 times that gain in increased revenue, decreased cost, improved utilization, optimizations, environmental, and so on.
yeah.
So it's a very powerful thing to do, that value identification and calling of the value realization throughout the process.
Mm.
Then, as you're tracking that, commonly in cadence meetings, you can track both the utilization as well as the realized values. So in this case, we're seeing the gaps compared to what we wanted to achieve in transactions and value. We're calling out why that is and what we're going to do about it. But this concept of missed value is very powerful because, again, gets the customer thinking not in the cost of using your functionality, but in the value derived. And then they'll start pulling you for expansion because they want to use more. It's of use to them.
Again, you have the slide deck up, so you can't see it, but my eyes are literally lighting up as you're sharing this information. This is truly amazing. In CS, we struggle to put into dollars the true value that is often provided. You can measure the value of the renewal that comes in. You can measure the value of the expansion, but the true value, and this helps a CS organization align itself with the value that they actually offer to the customer, and then the missed value as well. Identifying that can provide that targeted direction into what we should be doing next, what we should be addressing next, just so we can capitalize on what's been missed.
Yeah, great points. And what I'd also suggest in terms of identifying value and the target value up front, which can be a hard process, because sometimes you'll ask a customer, well, how much does this process cost you today in either
Right.
dollars or hours? And sometimes they're not great about being able to answer that. So part of what you want to do is start to create um, a, a reference based on industry standards. So industry
Yeah.
standards, this kind of activity has this expense to it. And so you're bringing your expertise even to identify the value up front that they may not recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. This is amazing.
That's fantastic. Okay. And then the last key point I want to call out in terms of tools is thinking about the customer success plan. So commonly used structure of most CSMs know this and hopefully use this, where you're identifying various different objectives. You want to identify them as SMART objectives, so they're tangible in terms of identifying when they're achieved, in what time frame, targeting what the tracking of the status and tasks and so on. So I'm using here what's a pretty standard structure for a customer success plan. The key point here is, though, that you want to make sure that you're constantly capturing new business objectives. You're putting them into the hopper. So even when you're not working on a given objective, you want to have that in place so that when another one winds down, you can bring the new ones in. So you're constantly driving them down that view of what are the next objectives we're trying to achieve. And the way you found them was with the previous tools that I called out. So whether that's the capability map and identified additional capabilities, whether that's looking at your system data in terms of utilization and value derived, you're then bringing that into this as the plan element of how you execute to achieve that value.
Another very practical tip and tool at our disposal. Very nice. Thank you, JP.
And that's what I had.
These are amazing tools, very practical, like I said, and something that you can absolutely put into practice once you map out the plan, the high level plan for your customer's journey or the customer's life cycle. And then you go from there and apply each of these steps to the conversation. So what is the reception? What do you hear from customers when you bring in this approach, when you lead this approach?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two parts. There's the part of the customer and it's the internal part too. So from a customer perspective, they like it because they see it as something that's proactively driving. And so a lot of times in my presentation, I use the term prescriptive. Prescriptive,
Yes.
proactive. CSM can't sit back. CSM has to be the trusted advisor to the customer. That's
Yeah.
bringing in a vision of what good looks like. It's showing them where they're doing well. It's holding them accountable. And so the customer really appreciates the fact that there's this methodology, there's this proactive CSM working with them holistically with other functions too, and identifying value as a key element of it. So they're very appreciative of that. Internally, there's a lot of appreciation that there is a methodology. And if you do this well, you're actually capturing the information in a central repository that everyone can access. So aside from one-on-one meetings that you may be having, say on a weekly or monthly basis with the account team, being able to track it in a system like a customer success platform is essential that everybody can see it in real time. It simplifies everyone's understanding the process and more consistently brings expansion.
Yeah.
And the thing I'd say, again, going back to my original comment, the most important thing a CSM can probably do to show unique value is to drive expansion along with the sales rep. And a tenet to that is also your best your best way of protecting your role
Yeah.
is to have sales reps see you as somebody that's feeding them information and
Yeah.
set for their expansion.
I couldn't agree more. I have seen the best success stories are where CS and sales are aligned at the hip. I mean, both it's I like to call it the triad because there's the SE that brings in the technical expertise to the conversation, and they actually can go down a step deeper and actually make that technical use case live, actionable for the customer. But when the sales team is aligned with CS and the SEs, everybody works almost it's almost music. You can
Yeah,
see a story come into formation, and you often and customers feel that. You customers can sense the harmony. They can sense that they have a good support system in the vendor, and they know who to go to when there's something that they need from the vendor. So everything you said, I couldn't agree more. It's music to my ears, and I often wonder why these common sense practices are so difficult. I see internal disharmony. I see teams squabbling, but at the end of the day, it is about the customer, and it benefits us as a vendor because
yeah, yeah,
drives expansion, brings value to the conversation.
yeah. And the thing I
Yeah,
mostly
go
want
ahead,
to say
please.
is it's you often lack cohesion when you
Yeah,
don't have methodology like this.
yeah. I have a couple questions here from the audience. So, some one of our audience members is asking, how do you suggest aligning the goals of customer success teams with the broader objectives of an expanding company?
Um, well, everybody should be supporting that expanding company, and expansion and renewals is the essential part that a CSM plays within that expansion.
Yeah,
So it's one and the same. Now, the nuance there is back to, again, the CSM being recognized for that. All too often right now, executive management doesn't recognize the CSM's role in the commercial terms because CSMs often think in terms of realized value. Realized value is a great concept, a great term, and something you should keep an eye out, but that has to translate into something financial.
correct. And that capability map that you shared earlier, that can help you define that, translate that to dollars.
Yeah.
So Swati asks, how do you maintain or even improve customer satisfaction when your business is going through significant changes or expansion? That's a great point. Expansion leads to change, and change is hard. So how do you maintain or improve customer satisfaction?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any one answer to it. The beauty of the job of a CSM is that you are creating that cohesion across different teams that will affect the perception of your customer. And so, as much as possible, as you can brief those other teams before they talk to a customer, jump into support cases just to let them know the context. So you can help to smooth out those rough edges. So like Rijuta, you were talking about before, the view that the customer has a view is better, even if behind the scenes
Yeah.
there's a lot of craziness. You can
Yeah.
hide some of that through the communication with those teams, through the preparation, through the context that you're providing, and through the advocacy sometimes. So there's any number of times that I've gone head to head internally representing a customer or something I thought was very reasonable that we were getting unreasonable pushback internally.
Right. And uh, again, all of the internal skirmishes or disharmony, that word comes to mind often when I talk
Yeah.
about teams that are not aligned, that are not completely singing to the same tune or song. It should that ex the customer's experience should be seamless. This should all be transparent to the customer, correct? They shouldn't be seeing all of the sausage making shouldn't be apparent to them. They just need to see the end product, and they just want somebody to help them get to what they want to accomplish. And I think that is a service that we can absolutely offer to them.
Yeah. And let me mention something there too, is there's the tactical part, which is what we're both talking about primarily now, which is about in any given client, any given situation, trying to smooth things over. But part of the things that can be one of the things that can be overlooked by CSMs is their role in the strategic improvements of the
Yeah.
operation. So
Yeah.
as they start to see patterns again and again internally that are problematic, working with either their management team or that group that they're dealing with to say, we keep hitting the same thing. How do we not hit it systemically?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, that is a question that does come up often, and not always doesn't always have a good answer. How do we, unless there is a concerted effort made to address it across the organization, I think oftentimes it needs more than one team to acknowledge and then deal with it. Now, that's a great segue into this question that is here on the platform. When planning for expansion, how early then should the customer success team be involved in the strategic planning process? This is a great question, Thomas.
Yeah, I think it's from day one probably, and it depends really what the renewal that's coming up, if there's a renewal aspect, but particularly if there's a renewal coming up, you want to do it well before that renewal. But from the start, you should have the team come together to identify the initial objectives and the strategy that you're going to work jointly to achieve expansion and what your role in it. So, for example, the sales rep may say, well, they're talking about these three different objectives, but objective number three is the most important for us to achieve early because it
Yeah.
leads to this expansion motion in a very specific area. So that's where the CSM will try to ensure that all those different functions are rolled out, but particularly function three that aligns with the expansion motion.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. Start early because we're talking about expansion. The customer's already a customer, so CS should already be involved. They should have a pulse on the customer sentiment. And that leads me to my next question here. What's your go-to tool for keeping tabs on customer vibes during a big scale up? Do you have a tool of recommendation that you recommend?
For customer what? Customer wise?
Yeah, to customer vibes, to get a pulse on the customer sentiment.
Yeah. So my go-to tool is normally a customer success platform. So that's a platform, Gainsight, PlanHat, other tools that are like that, that will
Yeah,
aggregate information in one view. But aside from the tool, I'll also mention that there's a very specific methodology that I go through in terms of the meetings. Rijuta, maybe we'll do a session on that at some point.
yeah,
And one of the important meetings is a customer cadence meeting and thinking about that in a structured way. That's another
yeah,
one where CSMs often will kind of ad hoc, how was your weekend? How are things doing? Very generally. I like a much more prescriptive approach where you're identifying, do we have the right players? How is the training going? What are our customer success plan? How are we working against that? What's the utilization look like? And so on. And that helps drive a lot of these things aside from the tooling that will show you in a dashboard and allow you to track, but that's where you're capturing a lot of that information. An additional part I know, Raju, is very interesting to you is I've talked about a lot of things manually thus far, but AI can come into play in
yeah.
all of these things where it's analyzing the data. What are the emails that have come and gone? What's the sentiment that appears from that or conversations? That can then also, aside from the manual updates that you might have in a stoplight or in a status summary, it identifies things that you may not have even recognized.
Absolutely. more and more we are being asked to do more with less. And CS, in my experience, is always a lean organization, offers so much value, but doesn't always get the investment in proportion to the value that it brings to the table. That said, AI is 100% something that we can rely on as part of the platform or independently, just as we think about improving operational efficiencies for each of our actions. So yeah, thank you for that. Yes, it is near and dear to me to be a part of the whole AI conversation. And again, looking forward. I mean, Gen Z is coming into the workforce. We need to make things interesting for them. Fantastic. Yeah, here's a comment. CS is grossly overlooked. So we have agreement there for sure from our audience.
But can I go back on the key harping thing, which I know, Rijuta, you feel strongly about? Attach yourself to revenue, and you won't be as overlooked. So what you want to get to a point as a CSM where you have one or more sales reps that are singing your praises. Like without Rijuta, I could have never closed this deal. I would have never expanded that. That is your best visibility, your best safety, your best appreciation as a CSM is being associated with revenues in some form, directly, not indirectly.
I've had, when this works well, when this partnership works well with sales, I've had sales team go to bat for CS with the C-suite in an organization just because they couldn't do their jobs without a CSM by their side, and they absolutely see the value. So yes, make friends internally so you can be sure that people have your back. You can't be everywhere at the same time. One success takeaway for us, JP, what about the prescriptive approach, about AI, about anything successfully, what is one takeaway you'd like to leave, like the audience to leave with today?
Well, I already hit the revenue producing. I'll hit the other one, which is my comment about prescriptive and structured. So really thinking about your methodology and how you're walking the customer through their journey, how you're collaborating internally, how you're tracking your data in a consistent way, all those things. So rather than solving a problem again and again and again, doing it in a more cohesive and consistent and systemic way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I absolutely enjoyed this conversation. I love it when we can bring practical tips to the conversation versus just having a philosophical discussion on something. So thank you for this, JP. The prescriptive approach is truly something that any one of us can take and put into practice. So appreciate that. And then
thanks
like I said,
thanks to you too. It's very appreciated, and I've loved also hearing your thoughts about how to approach CS, which is very akin to how I approach things.
Yeah, we absolutely can do. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for all the engagement, the fantastic questions, and last but not the least, or most importantly, I should say, my sincere thanks to the Thinkly team, Aishwarya, Ganesh, and there's a whole content team. Again, very lean, but they do a fantastic job of leading up to these sessions and then even following the sessions. So thank you to all of you. JP, it's been a pleasure. Please come back. Let's do a workshop with yet another practical, how can we do this? Leading customer success meetings or anything else that is near and dear to you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.